Welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bushel. Bush, we're doing a special 2023 year-end series as we conclude another tennis season, Open Era Gold. Why don't you explain what exactly that is?
Just my love of Spandau Ballet, Devang. I love the song Gold so much. No, I think it's time for us to take a walk down memory lane, take a look at some of our favorite matches that have happened throughout the course of the 2023 season. And we're going to start with our picks. Each of us have a men's and women's match that have taken place in 2023. Over the next month, we'll dive through a couple of them, starting with my men's one today. I'm looking forward to talking to you about it, and hopefully everyone enjoys.
All right, so today, Simon, we're looking at Andy Murray versus Stefanos Tsitsipas in the second round of Wimbledon. Obviously, this tournament means a lot for Andy Murray, Bush, but I think this one especially felt like potentially the last time we could see Andy here at this tournament.
Tons of storylines going into this one, isn't there, in 2023? You have Stefanos Tsitsipas, who made it to the Australian Open final at the start of the season and then really went through a bit of a ride for the rest of up until this grass court tournament. Wasn't the greatest.
Inexplicable losses.
Yeah.
That's how you can describe Stefanos' year. Like, you look at this chart and you're like, what? What happened there?
He's not a very good grass court player. Historically, to this point in 2023, it has to be said, his results have been patchy at best, to be charitable to the young Greek. The flip side of that, of course, Dev, is that we have two-time champion Andy Murray, who is still on tour, still trying to make a go of it. He is, at this point in 2023, I think his highest ranking he's been back up to since returning to the tour from that hip surgery. And he's in good form, is he not? He's won back-to-back challenges. He won at Surbiton and in Nottingham. Surprising to see him in such good form, but he's such a good grass court player that maybe we shouldn't be shocked by that.
No, and I think the whole thing with Andy in this return from that hip surgery, in which the more you hear about it and the more you hear about athletes in other sports undergoing similar surgeries and how difficult it is for them to come back, just in hockey, seeing Nicholas Backstrom, a Washington Capitals player, really struggle and going through it, I had even more appreciation for what Andy Murray was trying to do. But I think the big issue we saw, Bush, is that he kept losing early in the main tour tournaments. And that meant no match reps, no ability to get into a rhythm, no ability to get into a flow state. And I think his tennis suffered for that. So the ability to win Surbiton, win in Nottingham, I will say, and perhaps a foreshadowing, the level of players he beat along the way, not your top. I think Dominic Stricker was one of those people he beat in Nottingham, but I don't know. I think this whole comeback for Andy has been super interesting and kind of weird as a spectator and as a fan of Andy, because at several points I've been thinking, why are you doing this? Go home to your family. And then at other points, like early on in this Steph match, it's like, this all makes sense. Why would you leave this?
So much to be spoken of in terms of his resilience and wanting to come back and still make a go of it. And I think just playing for himself as well, like trying to enjoy the sport. He doesn't owe anyone anything at this point, right? And just being able to go out there and continually battle the way that he has done since returning from the hip injury. I think it really speaks volumes of his personality and character that he wants to come back. And I think it sets a really good example for a lot of people that despite being world number one and multiple Grand Slam champion, he was content with slugging it away at the more challenging parts of the tour. It's so hard to ascend back up the rankings when you fall down it because you're playing such good players in the opening round, as you mentioned, every single week. And none more so than having to play a guy who has been inside of the world's top 5 in round number 2, Dev. It's not an easy challenge, even on your favorite surface.
No, but it lined up pretty well for Andy, I'd say, in terms of the context and what that match had in terms of stakes. I believe it was the night match, Bush, that when it started, at least, it was the last match on center court. So you had a raucous crowd that was pulling as hard as they could for Andy against someone who I think it's fair to say Stefanos is easily rattled at this stage of the game. I don't think that's unfair, Simon.
No, I think that's very reasonable, just given some of his performances at Wimbledon as well. Him losing it against Nick Kyrgios. I think we can all remember that one as well. So it's not unsurprising, perhaps, that there might be moments of weakness that you could try and chip away at during the course of a match like this. That being said, all things considered, one of the preview articles that I read going into this one was that one of the positives is that he just started a new relationship with Paulo Badosa. And this was written as one of the X factors, Dev. Unbelievable. This passes for journalism, but apparently so. He might have a wave, a bounce coming from this.
Never forget that halcyon time where we were smacked in the face repeatedly with Badosa Tsitsipas content for days on end. This was the thing we were supposed to care about. And I don't know if it was trying to rehabilitate Stefanos' image as the son of a bad dad and a bit of a bratty guy who yells at his mom, pairing him up with Paulo Badosa, someone who people generally like. But I don't know. I think I'm annoyed at Stefanos, really, Simon. Like, I think I wanted so much more a few years ago, and that sounds really weird to say as someone who is thousands of kilometers away from him and sounding stalkerish as I say this, but it should have been better than this, Bush. He had so much, and I know nothing is done yet, but I don't know. I feel like his stock is at an all-time low heading in terms of like popularity. And I feel like going against Andy Murray as well made it so that it was the perfect recipe for an upset.
Totally. That's where we find ourselves going into this round 2 affair. Stefanos Tsitsipas got through Dominic Thiem in round 1, himself making a comeback and attempting the husk
of Dominic Thiem.
Jeez.
We must add. But I desperately wanted Dominic to win that match, to set up a date with Andy in which you could surely be content no matter who won, I think. But no, wasn't meant to be.
Murray himself got through an all-British affair, knocking off Ryan Peniston in round 1. And the stage is set nicely, Dev. A round 2 clash. Contrasting styles, certainly. Both big servers, and I think both have weaknesses that become slightly more pronounced on a quicker surface. Murray, definitely not historically, but now so with his sort of ailing movement. And then Stefanos Tsitsipas in return of serve, which he does enough during this match, it has to be said. But as we begin, the tale of the tape and the story of this match is big serving, and Andy Murray is going to hit absolutely everything into the Stefanos Tsitsipas backhand.
I think he gets to like 126 early on, Bush, which is an excellent sign. But the things that stood out, the things that I remembered from the beginning, at least, was Andy serving extremely well, which was basically kind of his only shot to do this. And I think I wouldn't say inability to stick in long rallies, but I don't think he wanted to so much to preserve himself. It was working well, even though he dropped the first set in a tiebreak. But the Stefanos forehand, Simon, it makes sense that Murray is trying to avoid it at all costs. Also adding in the fact that the backhand for Steph is a complete wild card. But the Tsitsipas forehand, Simon, is just a joy.
I think also we have to remember that there is reason and rationale behind why you were frustrated with him of not perhaps kicking on. He did get to an Australian Open final, and I think demonstrated there's enough tools there, is there not, that this dude should be a really good grass court player? Like, he should be really good. His ability to hit big forehands, to serve massive, to cover up some of his weaknesses. But God damn it, Dev, that backhand return is going to be the Achilles heel potentially for the rest of his career. And it is on display here. He does not do a particularly good job of just blocking balls back into play. And it gets the better of him despite coming out on top in that first set.
No, it doesn't. And here's my old man yelling at a cloud take for this episode, Simon. But I think the conditions changing the way they did, and we'll get to the stoppage and the curfew stuff, but if a match is played with the roof covering it for the majority of it, shouldn't it end that way too? Isn't it strange to go from a match indoors to a match outside?
In this new world of tennis that potentially we'll have coming in the future, whenever you listen to this, maybe we'll have multiple different surfaces, multiple different times of day, just to make it even more wild. No, I completely agree with you. Like, I think if you're going to ask the players to start a match in certain conditions, I think it's only reasonable to ask them to end it as well. This first set is a perfect demonstration of grass court tennis. It's big serving. They don't really get a look in at anyone's break points at all. I don't think there's any break points actually in this whole set. It's really close. It's very, very close. And if you enjoy this kind of sort of cat and mouse situation where it's just like, can I hang in a service game long enough to eke out a breakpoint opportunity? I think you would absolutely love everything that comes in this match. And this first serve was a really good example of it.
First serve was excellent. He was good at net. I think he also, I don't know if this is just a complete armchair psychology or actually fair to say, but I think in the first 3 sets, and especially towards the end of set 2, Simon, I think Andy fully believed this was possible, and fully possible perhaps to end it that night, which I think was important and probably the only way he was going to win this match. I think when he beats Tsitsipas in the second set tiebreak 7-2, the idea that this is not going to be a nice story and he can actually win the match was there. The highlights, especially the package that I watched from Wimbledon, which they put out after the tournament was over, which I don't know why, but they skipped over some huge points that I found inexplicable and maddening. So I had to go find some of them myself, but I felt like the conditions really suited Andy well, and everything was really tailor-made for him to make inroads against a not great Tsitsipas by any means that first day.
We have traded tie breaks. Steph with the first one, Murray with the second one. Murray himself is on a heater, I think, to start that third set, buoyed by taking it in the tie break. I think he won 13 out of 15 points to the back end of that second set into the start of the third. Steph's level just drops a little bit, right? Not a huge amount, but enough that sort of fragility that we mentioned, Murray's going to jump all over that and take advantage. And he does break immediately at the start of the third set, followed by a ridiculously long hold for Murray, which was probably a huge thing for him to just hang around and just get across the finish line. And that's the thing in grass court tennis. You can't give up your serve. And I know it's easy to sit here and say this as we're nice sunning ourselves not playing in front of 20,000 people, but it just do anything you can to hold on to your service games and never give your opponent an inch, especially at the start of sets. And that's what happened here, is that the level dropped slightly and Murray took advantage of it.
The set felt perfect, the third set, except for the fall, in which I think towards the end, Andy goes down and he's clutching his groin and immediately fearing the worst and kind of thinking, maybe maybe the curfew being a thing isn't the worst thing in the world, because I thought Andy was dead along with everyone else watching. So it's funny, at the time, I wasn't as devastated that they were going to have to call it after he won that set 6-4, but we can talk about the village of Wimbledon, Simon, and all the stuff that's going on around there. But how do you feel about this curfew in general?
It's funny. I didn't make this point in the notes, but it was one of my questions that I was going to ask you. How do you feel about the curfew at Wimbledon?
Seems really dumb. I'll say that. But also, counterpoint. I don't like when U.S. Open matches end at 4 a.m. and someone has lost their job because they were staying to watch Lloyd Harris and John Millman play in the second round. I don't think that's good either. So I think there's room for in between, but I generally think if you start something and you got a roof and you got lights, you should be able to finish it.
There's something very test match cricket about knowing that something ends at 11 and someone just playing for the time about it.
Very, because we have to get lunch, like we have to eat is the most, it's very practical. But yeah, I don't know. I think the people of the village of Wimbledon, the people around it, I don't care for that very much based on what I've heard, so...
It seems reasonable to me. Andy Murray closes out the third set 6-4. Also ends out the day. Set 4 begins the next morning. Different court conditions, as you mentioned. Blazing sunshine and outdoors now as opposed to indoors. I don't think it changes a huge amount in terms of the kind of style and game that we're getting here. It's still dominated by serve. One thing of note in this set, Stefanos' hair is completely wild. Absolutely wild. He looks all over the shop. And I think contrast with Andy Murray, who looks completely and utterly shagged throughout this entire set. I think he wanted,
Yeah.
I think, as you were mentioning, trying to wrap it up on the previous evening as opposed to going into a next day. It looked like, I think it affected him in this fourth set because he didn't quite have the same energy bounce. Despite it going to a tiebreaker, he looked, maybe it's just an Andy Murray body language thing in general, but from my vantage point, he looked completely spent.
He did. And I mean, it had to end in that tiebreak for him. He had to win that tiebreak. A fifth set didn't look good for anyone. You said, I mean, the sun didn't change much, but it did feel like Andy was being roasted alive out there. I felt like the sun was
just a British thing,
purposely shining extra bright on him, specifically as he wilted away.
I think one of the things the reason that I wanted to pick this is for the moments in the fourth set, in that tiebreaker, because you're not going to get many more Andy Murray matches, especially
at 3-3.
Like it's
at 3-3, it felt possible, and there was cries of desperation amongst us in the crowd and watching at home because it did feel doable. There was a real bad Stefanos shank, I believe, that I was like, okay, because I mean, throughout that fourth set, the baseline rallies were pretty immaculate. They were both pretty damn good, but it did feel like there was an opening there early in the tiebreak, but it went away so quickly.
It's a great point that Steph plays at 6-3 to get across the line. It's test match tennis, as I'm christening it, at its best. It was nail-biting. It was back and forth. It was a great tiebreaker. Stefanos Tsitsipas wins it, and we head to a fifth set, Dev.
You mentioned body language, and I think Andy this year, he has been getting madder, but it's not the same mad. And I think it's more devastation at where his body is, maybe, and recognizing that the end is very close, probably, and some decisions will have to be made. And he's made allusions to that several times throughout the 2023 season, but I was expecting a bit of a dip in the fifth assignment, and it happened relatively early, and kind of exactly how you described what happened in the third set went against Andy here, where the level dropped just enough.
It's a perfect mirror image of what happens in set number 3, which is that you sort of hang on just about to hold the level up. In that case, it was Tsitsipas, the level dropping, and Murray jumping all over a break point. The flip is true here as well in the fifth set, where Murray just drops a little bit. Steph jumps all over it and breaks at 1-2. You can see how dejected Murray is when he dumps a backhand into the net. He looks like he's, circle anything you want in terms of a metaphor here. Like his dog has just died, or someone's, stolen his ice cream. He looks so dejected and so miserable at that point.
Well, and the collective expectation, or everyone kind of banking on this guy to secure that we have a good time and we're all having fun, that's a lot of pressure. And I think it goes both ways. We mentioned that it lifted Andy early on against Stefanos, when I think probably you would say that he's obviously not the favorite, and even up 2-1 on a fresh day, probably still not the favorite. And I don't know. I think it began to feel a bit too big of a mountain on the second day with the sun shining bright. And in the end, I think Stefanos was too much. He ends it with another extremely well-played serve. And that was sort of the hallmark of what Tsitsipas was able to do on the second day assignment to advance to the third round, in which he lost, right? I think he lost he won against Laszlo Djere, and then he ended up losing to Chris Eubanks at Wimbledon, Simon. But for this to be your match that you picked, I think it's interesting because we saw Andy go on the rest of the year and basically do what he had been doing all year, which is not really be able to string together wins on the ATP tour and generate some momentum and then have it crushed, usually by Alex de Minaur. And so here we are, and here we are with potential super tour coming and all these other things. And I truly wonder, with all the other things happening outside of the court, how much more does Andy want to give to tennis?
Yeah, and I think just to have some context of why the pick is why I've chosen this one. I think one part of it is, of course, how many more Andy Murray matches will you get at Wimbledon, as you were mentioning. And the second part is it's just so close. Like it kind of feels a bit like playoff baseball, if you want to use that analogy as well, where any single pitch, there's so much on every single pitch that if you get it wrong, then the whole inning can go and the whole game can turn around. I kind of feel like the way in grass court tennis, good grass court tennis, and like how this one was as well, where you're expected to hold serve. If you don't, it's going to be challenging, but you can chip away at things. And every point felt like it was big in that regard. You just wanted to continue to make progress in games and trying to eke some out. And it was just, super tight. It was really, really tight and really fun to watch. So I had a blast watching this one, Dev.
Yeah, and I think to kind of go against what I just said in terms of the depressing aspect of seeing Andy not at the peak of his powers, he's back to 42 in the world. To do that, Simon, he's played a boatload of tennis at a level we haven't expected. But what I think this has done is kind of shine a light on that tour and that rung of tennis for a lot of people who maybe haven't been able to follow it or weren't interested in following it. And to see people tune in to these challenger events that Andy was playing and watching them on streams and having a kind of event around it, I think that was really cool. And I think the exposure Andy gave to these other tours is really important, because I guess you get a better idea of what the ecosystem is, and you get a better idea of what it can do for players, because Andy is 42nd in the world, and we're talking like he had a shite season, when realistically, that's really impressive to claw your way back up to this level where, like you said, Simon, a couple of points here or there is a difference between beating the 5th best player in the world. Like it's pretty crazy. And I think when we look back at what Andy Murray was able to do and sort of restart again with a new dang hip, like it's one of those things that I think we'll only grow to appreciate more as the years go on.
I think also post-match, one of the aspects that we didn't touch upon is at this point, Stefanos Tsitsipas is still a really young man, and he's playing against someone that he idolized growing up as well. And I think that's indicated in his quotes post-match, saying it's never easy against Andy. I know everyone loves him here. It was a very difficult game, and I was very impressed with his level. Having 2 surgery, I was impressed with his level today, and I wish him all the best. And perhaps more poignantly, it was nerve-wracking. It's difficult to grow up watching him play on court. I looked up to him. I looked up to Novak, Roger, and Rafa. These 4 guys shaped the game and are the reason I am the player I am today. It's another aspect of this that we just tend to forget, is that these young kids are playing against guys who are deep, deep into their 30s and still giving it a go. Just one of the many facets of why this is such an entertaining sport that we love so much.
Wonderful. Shall we leave it there, Simon? Any closing thoughts on Stefanos and Andy in the second round at Wimbledon 2023?
Maybe we'll get it again one day. Who knows? It was fantastic. Encourage everyone to go back and watch it and check it out. Stefanos Tsitsipas has to be a good grass court player eventually. Question mark? Who knows? Maybe we'll leave that one there.
Get fed on that coaching staff. I don't know what Roger's doing these days, but that chip backhand, goddamn. A couple hours, got to do something. Okay, we'll leave it there. Reminder, we are on patreon.com/open era. Join us there, get the show ad free, get it early on Sundays, plus join us on the Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time. For producer Dylan on the 1s and 2s, and for Simon, thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next time.